At 1837 local time, southeast of Okinawa, a Japanese F-15 was already tracking a Chinese carrier group when the sound inside the cockpit suddenly changed. It was not the weather. It was not air traffic. It was not the sea below. It was the warning receiver. For several minutes, the signal had been normal, almost routine. A low electronic chirp, the kind of sound any fighter pilot expects when operating near a foreign carrier formation. Search radars were sweeping. Surface sensors were scanning. Airborne signals were moving through the sky in wide arcs. Then the chirp became sharp. The pilot glanced down once, targeting radar. This was not a broad search pattern. It was not casual tracking from a ship below. It was a focused lock, narrow and deliberate. The kind of radar mode used when an aircraft is no longer just observing. Somewhere ahead, a Chinese fighter had stopped watching and started aiming. The F-15 held its nose steady for half a second. Then the clouds ahead split open. A Chinese J-15 broke out of the gray layer, slightly high and to the left, closing fast from the 11 o'clock position. Twin engines, heavy carrier-based frame. Radar pointed directly at the Japanese aircraft. The distance was shrinking quickly. The safest response was obvious. Turn away. Report the lock. Create distance. Do not allow a tense intercept to become a high-speed mistake. But the Japanese pilot chose something else. He rolled right, straight toward the pressure. Stick hard right. Nose down. The F-15 snapped through 90 degrees as the horizon folded sideways across the canopy. 5 Gs pressed the pilot deep into the seat. The sea swung into view. The J-15 slid across the canopy frame, moving from 11 o'clock toward 3 o'clock in less than 2 seconds. Inside the helmet, the warning tone stopped. Lock broken. There was no celebration, no dramatic radio call, no wasted breath. The Japanese pilot simply held the maneuver and watched the receiver. This was not panic. It was geometry. The maneuver was called beaming. Turn perpendicular to a pulse Doppler radar, and the closure rate drops towards 0. A radar built to track objects moving toward or away from it suddenly has a problem. The target is no longer closing. It is crossing. The system begins sorting signals, filtering returns that look like clutter, noise, or background motion. For a moment, the F-15 disappeared from the Chinese radar picture. Not from the sky, from the system. And in modern air tactics, that is the first kind of survival that matters. The J-15 pilot adjusted immediately. He was not slow, he was not careless. He pushed his nose around, widened the scan, and began searching for the aircraft that had just vanished from his display. That was exactly what the Japanese pilot needed. Across the F-15's airframe, small antennas were listening. Wingtips, tail section, nose. Every signal from the Chinese fighter was being collected, sorted, and classified by the radar warning system. Frequency, pulse rhythm, scan behavior. Transition from lock to search. Transition from search back to track. The Chinese pilot thought he was hunting. In reality, he was transmitting. 8 seconds passed. Then the warning tone returned. Lock restored. From the Chinese cockpit, that probably looked like control. The target had tried to escape. The radar had found it again. Pressure had been re-established. But inside the F-15, the result meant something else. 8 seconds. That number mattered. 8 seconds to lose the lock, search, adjust, and reacquire after a beam maneuver. 8 seconds of radar behavior captured under stress. 8 seconds of the J-15 showing exactly how it searched when the target refused to fly straight. The Japanese pilot keyed his radio. Contact maneuvering, lock broken, re-established, collecting. That was all. Above the sea, the two fighters continued closing. The J-15 pressed harder now, narrowing the distance and holding its radar on the F-15 with more discipline. The warning tone stayed steady in the Japanese cockpit. The Chinese pilot had corrected his angle. He had learned from the first break. He wanted the F-15 in front of him, inside the radar cone, where the geometry favored the aircraft doing the locking. The Japanese pilot let him think that was happening. He leveled for a breath. Ahead, the evening sky darkened. Below, the ocean looked flat and cold, reflecting the last line of sunlight beneath the cloud deck. The Chinese fighter was close enough now that it was no longer just a radar contact. It was metal, engines, pylons, control surfaces, and intent. The F-15's warning receiver sounded again. Stable lock. The first test was complete. The Chinese radar had shown how it reacted when the target turned sideways. Now the Japanese pilot needed to know how it reacted when the target moved faster than the antenna could comfortably follow. His left hand adjusted the throttle. His right hand tightened around the stick. The J-15 stayed behind the nose, still painting him, still transmitting, still feeding the invisible collection system wrapped around the F-15. Then the Japanese pilot pulled hard. The Eagle's nose rose through the horizon and climbed into the fading sky. Airspeed began to drop. Gravity loaded the aircraft. The J-15 held the lock for the first second. Then the climb became steeper. The warning tone continued. the pilot kept pulling. At the top of the maneuver, the F-15 rolled inverted. For one suspended instant, the ocean was above him and the sky was below. Then he pulled through. The Eagle dropped out of the vertical, reversing direction in a hard descending arc, trading altitude for angle, speed, and separation. The airframe shuddered as the nose fell back through the horizon. Inside the helmet, the warning receiver went silent again. The J-15 had lost him a second time. And this time, the loss was not just about closure rate. It was about limits. The Chinese fighter was still capable, still close, still serious. But its radar had just revealed something more valuable than pressure. It had revealed delay. The Japanese pilot leveled out below the original flight path, breathing controlled, eyes moving between altitude, speed, and the threat display. The J-15 was already turning to reacquire. The next lock would come faster, the next pass would be closer, and somewhere above them, unseen and quiet, two more Japanese Eagles were waiting for the geometry to develop. The J-15 reacquired faster the second time. 5 seconds. That was the new number. The Japanese F-15 leveled below the original flight path, nose slightly low, engines steady, airframe still trembling from the vertical reversal. The warning tone returned inside the helmet with a hard electronic edge. Targeting lock restored. The Chinese pilot had adjusted. He had seen the beam. He had watched the vertical escape. Now he was no longer simply reacting. He was anticipating. The J-15 came down after him, nose correcting, radar cone tightening, trying to keep the Eagle in the center of the scope. Distance closed again, 500 meters. At that range, the encounter was no longer abstract. It was not just a symbol on a display or a line on a tactical board. It was metal moving through turbulent air. Two fighters close enough for each pilot to feel the decisions of the other aircraft. The Japanese pilot saw the J-15 flash across the canopy, heavy and aggressive, control surfaces making short, sharp corrections. Under its wings were guided stores, short-range systems, fuel, and pressure. The warning receiver stayed alive. The Chinese pilot was holding the lock. Inside the F-15, the Japanese pilot did not rush the next move. He needed more than escape. He needed behavior. How fast the radar recovered. How wide it searched. How tightly it tracked after reacquisition. How much angle it could tolerate before losing the target again. The J-15 carried a mechanically scanned radar. That mattered. The antenna inside the nose had to physically move to follow a target. It could search, it could track, it could lock, but it could not look everywhere at once. And it could not move faster than its own hardware allowed. That weakness only appeared when the target forced it to chase. So the F-15 forced it to chase. The Japanese pilot pulled left hard. The Eagle bit into the turn, G-force rising through the cockpit as the aircraft carved across the sky. The J-15 tried to follow, nose coming around to preserve the lock. For a moment, the radar held. Then the F-15 tightened the arc. 6 Gs. The horizon began to rotate. The sea tilted. The J-15 drifted from behind the nose toward the side of the canopy. The warning tone flickered, stretched, then cut out. Lock broken again, but this time the Japanese pilot did not extend away. He kept turning. The F-15 came through 180 degrees until its nose was pointed back toward the Chinese fighter. For one short, frozen moment, both aircraft were facing each other, closing head-on through the same piece of sky. The Chinese pilot did not expect that. Targets run, targets break away, targets try to create distance. This one turned back. The J-15 pilot pulled right to avoid the merge, breaking his own geometry. His radar lost the target during the turn. For 3 seconds, neither aircraft had a clean lock. 3 seconds was enough. The F-15 used the gap to gain angle, not distance, angle. When the J-15 reacquired, the Japanese fighter was no longer directly ahead. It had shifted farther around the Chinese aircraft's clock position. What had been 3 o'clock was moving toward 4. A small change on paper, a major change in a close-range intercept. This was no longer simple defensive flying. It was positioning. Every break had a purpose. Every maneuver carried the Eagle a little farther toward the one area a nose-mounted radar could not protect. Behind the aircraft. The Chinese pilot pressed closer, 400 meters. He had learned that the Japanese pilot was not leaving. That made him push even harder. He kept his radar active, kept the pressure forward, and tried to force another mistake. From his cockpit, it may have looked like the F-15 was running out of options. But the opposite was happening. The longer he transmitted, the more he gave away. Search pattern, track rhythm, reacquisition timing, radar discipline under pressure. The Japanese warning receiver continued recording while the pilot kept shaping the geometry. Above them, at 35,000 feet, 2 more F-15AS from Naha held in silence. Their radars were dark. Their radios were quiet. They were not rushing to assist the first Eagle. Not yet. They were being held outside the Chinese pilot's awareness, guided by ground control and passive tracking. From above, they watched the shape of the encounter develop. One J-15 pressing forward, one F-15 slowly pulling him out of position. The trap was not closed, but the outline was already visible. Ground control issued the next instruction in a calm voice. Eagle 2, Eagle 3, descend to Angels 2-8. Maintain radar silent, vector 185. The two pilots answered with clicks. No voice, no signature, no warning. Below them, the J-15 locked again, 300 meters. The tone sounded through the Japanese pilot's helmet. The Chinese fighter was close enough now to make every movement serious. Too much pull and the aircraft could lose energy. Too little and the radar would hold him. One late correction and two fighters could end up in the same airspace before either pilot had time to react. The Japanese pilot broke right. Textbook beam. The warning tone died for 3 seconds, then returned. The Chinese pilot was getting faster. He had started cutting off the obvious escapes, turning before the F-15 completed the maneuver, predicting where the Eagle would appear. He thought he was tightening control. He thought the Japanese pilot was being cornered. But every faster reacquisition told the same story from another angle. The J-15 was adapting. And because it was adapting, it was transmitting more, searching harder, and revealing more under pressure. The Japanese pilot saw the next opening. He rolled slightly, dropped the nose, and prepared to combine the horizontal brake with a vertical slice. A simple turn would no longer be enough. The Chinese pilot had learned that pattern. The next move had to be sharper. Below, the sea filled the lower half of the canopy. Ahead, the J-15 held the lock. Above, two silent Eagles continued descending, still unseen, still waiting. The Chinese pilot believed he was winning the encounter. He had no idea he was flying deeper into the geometry that would end it. The next brake almost worked against the Japanese pilot. He rolled right, dropped the nose, and pulled down through the turn. Not a clean horizontal beam this time. Not a pure vertical escape. A compound maneuver. Right, down and across the J-15's radar cone at the same time. 7 Gs hit the cockpit. His suit tightened around his legs, forcing blood back toward his chest. His breathing changed into short, controlled bursts. The edges of his vision narrowed. The F-15 trembled under the load, not failing, but reminding him exactly where the limits were. The warning receiver cut out. Lock broken. For 1 second, the cockpit was quiet. Then 2. Then the tone came back. The J-15 had reacquired in 2 seconds. That was new. The Chinese pilot was no longer chasing where the F-15 had been. He was predicting where it would be. He had learned the rhythm of the Japanese pilot's defensive brakes and was cutting inside the escape path before it fully opened. That made him dangerous. It also made him readable. Inside the F-15, the system kept recording every burst of radar energy. Every change in scan width. Every shift from search mode to track mode. Every correction the J-15 made when the target disappeared and reappeared at the edge of the scope. The Chinese pilot thought the shorter reacquisition time meant he was winning. The Japanese pilot saw something different. He saw a pattern. The J-15 closed again. 300 meters became 250, then 200. At that distance, the encounter stopped feeling like air combat and started feeling like formation flying with hostile intent. The J-15 slid into view off the F-15's wing, close enough for the Japanese pilot to see heat shimmer behind the engines and small movements in the control surfaces as the Chinese fighter corrected inside disturbed air. The lock held. The warning tone stayed steady. The J-15 was transmitting continuously now, painting the F-15 at close range with its targeting radar. To the Chinese pilot, this was pressure, a message delivered without words. I can hold you here. I can track you whenever I choose. The Japanese pilot did not brake. Not yet. His eyes moved between the J-15 outside the canopy and the warning receiver inside the cockpit. His left hand stayed calm on the throttle. His right hand held the stick with small, precise corrections. At 200 meters, the radar data became even more valuable. Not just frequency, not just pulse repetition, power behavior, side lobe characteristics, close range tracking stability, small frequency drift under load. The way the radar adjusted when the target stayed close but refused to fly predictably. Data that could take months to collect in controlled conditions was arriving in real time under pressure from an active Chinese carrier fighter trying to dominate an intercept. 10 seconds passed. The J-15 held position. 12 seconds. The lock remained. 15. The Japanese pilot waited until the Chinese fighter drifted just far enough forward. Then he moved. Snap roll left, nose down. The F-15 dropped beneath the J-15's flight path, slicing through the air under the Chinese fighter's belly. The separation was tight enough that the Eagle hit disturbed air from the J-15's engines. The aircraft bucked. The right wing dipped hard. For half a second, the F-15 was no longer carving smoothly through the sky. It was being shoved sideways by invisible turbulence. The nose yawed. The horizon jumped. The sea filled the canopy, then snapped away. The pilot corrected. Stick right. Power in. Hold the turn. The Eagle clawed back into stable flight. Still moving. Still turning. Still carrying the angle it had fought to gain. When the aircraft rolled out, the J-15 was no longer beside him. It was ahead. The F-15 had crossed behind. 7 o'clock inside the Chinese fighter's rear quarter, in the place where a nose-mounted radar could not see. The warning receiver went silent for the first time in the encounter. This silence did not mean distance. It meant position. The J-15's radar swept forward and found nothing. The Chinese pilot widened the scan. Still nothing. He turned his head left, then right, searching through the canopy for a gray fighter against a darkening sky and an even darker sea. Nothing. He checked behind with mirrors and quick glances. Still nothing. The F-15 had not vanished from the air. It had vanished from the system the J-15 trusted most. The Japanese pilot did not activate his own radar. He did not return the lock. He did not give the Chinese pilot a warning tone to follow. He stayed passive, low and behind, letting the geometry do the work. This was the most dangerous part of the encounter. The F-15 could have ended the demonstration right there with a hard radar lock from the rear quarter. One focus beam and the Chinese pilot's cockpit would have filled with the same sound he had been forcing onto the Japanese fighter for more than 20 minutes. But that was not the mission. The mission was not humiliation. The mission was to collect, survive, and control escalation. The J-15 began a hard turn, trying to drag its nose back toward where the F-15 had to be. Its radar searched ahead. Empty. The turn widened. Still empty. The Chinese pilot was spending fuel, energy, and attention trying to solve a problem that was no longer in front of him. Behind him, the F-15 held the blind spot. Above them, the other two Eagles began their descent through 28,000 feet. Still radar silent. Still unseen. Still waiting. The Chinese pilot had spent the entire encounter trying to keep one Japanese fighter inside his radar cone. He had not noticed the sky above him changing. The J-15 was now searching for a target it could no longer place. Its radar swept forward. Nothing. The Chinese pilot tightened his turn, pulling the nose through the horizon, trying to drag the F-15 back into the cone where his sensors could work. The radar widened its scan. The display refreshed. Empty air returned empty air. For the first time in the engagement, the Japanese fighter was not simply breaking lock. It was behind the problem. The F-15 held low and aft, gray paint fading into the dark surface of the sea below. Its radar remained silent. No active scan, no targeting lock, no electronic signature for the Chinese pilot to follow. Only position, patience, geometry. In a close-range encounter, a nose-mounted radar has one basic job. Look forward. That was now the wrong direction. The J-15 pilot turned harder. The airframe loaded up. Vapor flickered from the wing roots as the fighter tried to bring its nose around. The pilot checked left, then right, then back through the canopy frame, searching for the aircraft he knew had to be nearby. Still nothing. The F-15 stayed inside the blind area, close enough to matter, quiet enough to disappear. The Chinese pilot completed the turn and finally caught a brief contact ahead as the geometry rotated. The lock returned for a moment. The warning receiver inside the Japanese cockpit sounded again. But the contact was not where it should have been. The F-15 had gained more angle. Every maneuver had carried it farther around the J-15's clock. 3 o'clock had become 4. 4 had become 5. Now the Eagle was nearly deep 6. The one position where the Chinese fighter's radar could not help him and his underwing systems had no immediate answer. The J-15 pilot understood part of it, not all of it. He knew the Japanese fighter was working toward his tail. He knew the situation was becoming harder to control. He knew that if he allowed one more cycle, the F-15 would be fully behind him. So he made the decision that broke the geometry. He pushed the throttles forward. Afterburners lit. The J-15 surged ahead, engines glowing bright against the fading sky. Acceleration pressed the Chinese pilot back into the seat as the aircraft leapt forward, trading turning room for speed. He was no longer trying to patiently reacquire. He was trying to force a merge, close distance, cross noses, make the F-15 choose. At first, it looked aggressive. In reality, it was a concession. Speed can solve many problems in the air. It can create separation, it can force timing, it can turn hesitation into survival. But speed cannot restore bad angles once a pilot has surrendered them. The Japanese pilot saw the J-15 commit. He did not turn away, he drove toward it. Two fighters now pointed at each other through the same section of sky. Closure rate climbed past 900 knots. The sea below became a blurred sheet of steel blue motion. There was no time left for long radar cycles or careful reacquisition patterns. This was merged geometry. 800 meters. The J-15's nose filled more of the canopy, 600 meters. The Japanese pilot could see the shape of the opposing cockpit, the hard line of the intake, the dark flash of the wing roots. 400 meters, commit point. Turn now or share the same airspace. The Japanese pilot waited one more heartbeat, then he rolled inverted. The F-15 snapped upside down and pulled into a descending turn, slicing under the J-15's flight path at 7 Gs. The Chinese fighter flashed overhead with violent speed, a heavy shape crossing the space the F-15 had occupied less than a second earlier. The shock of displaced air hit the Eagle as it passed underneath. The pilot kept pulling. Nose down, roll through. Recover upright, check 6. The world stabilized in pieces. Horizon, sky, target. The J-15 was now ahead. The F-15 was behind it. Low, 400 meters back, deep 6. The geometry had flipped completely. The Chinese pilot hauled his aircraft into another hard turn, trying to recover the situation. But the encounter had changed. His radar could not see behind him. His systems needed a solution. His nose was pointed at empty sky, while the Japanese fighter sat where his sensors were weakest. Then his warning receiver lit up. Not from behind, from above. 2 new contacts, high left, high right, descending through 28,000 feet. The Chinese pilot looked up through the canopy. 2 more F-15S were dropping into the fight. They had been there the entire time, quiet at altitude, radars dark, guided by ground control, while the first Eagle pulled the J-15 out of position. Now they were active. Their radar beams reached down from angles the Chinese fighter could not answer without exposing itself even further. 3 aircraft, 3 axes, 1 J-15. The pilot checked his rear quarter. The first F-15 was still there, low and behind, inside his turn circle. He checked high. The other 2 Eagles were descending like closing doors, one controlling the left escape route, the other controlling the right. His own radar remained useless against the aircraft behind him. His nose could not point in 3 directions. His fuel state was worse after more than 30 minutes of hard maneuvering. His wingman was not close enough. His tactical picture had collapsed. This was the moment the entire encounter became clear. The Japanese pilot had not been trying to escape. He had been moving the J-15. Every beam, every vertical break, every turn toward the pressure. Each move shifted the Chinese fighter a few degrees deeper into the trap. The J-15 had followed the aircraft, but it had missed the formation. Now the formation was awake. The F-15 behind him did not need to escalate. The 2 above did not need to close further. The message was already delivered through radar energy, altitude, and position. The J-15 still had equipment under its wings, but no clean solution. It still had speed, but no safe exit without exposing its tail. It still had radar, but every meaningful problem was now behind or above. Inside the Chinese cockpit, the math became simple. Continue, and the next move would not belong to him. The Japanese Eagles held their discipline. No one overcommitted. No one crowded the aircraft. No one turned the trap into an accident. They simply stayed where the J-15 could not solve them. And for the first time since the initial lock, the Chinese fighter stopped pressing forward. That was the first sign. Not a retreat, not yet, just a hesitation in the geometry. The Chinese fighter rolled wings level for half a second, then began a shallow turn away from the 3-sided bracket closing around it. Inside the cockpit, the pilot had done the math. One F-15 was low behind him, 400 meters back, positioned inside the one place his nose-mounted radar could not see. 2 more Eagles were above, descending from opposite angles, now active, now painting him from high left and high right. His radar looked forward. The tactical picture did not. He had guided systems under the wings, but no clean lock. He had speed, but no angle. He had engine power, but not enough fuel to keep pushing through hard turns after more than 30 minutes of maneuvering. His wingman was still minutes away. And minutes do not matter in an encounter measured by seconds. If this had been an actual fight, the outcome was already decided. The Japanese pilot behind him did not escalate. The 2 Eagles above did not collapse the distance. They held. That was the point. Discipline mattered more than spectacle. No dramatic move, no reckless pass, no radio threat, just 3 aircraft occupying the exact positions that made the J-15's next aggressive move tactically impossible. The Chinese pilot reduced pressure first. His targeting radar dropped out of lock. Inside the lead F-15, the warning receiver finally went quiet. This time, the silence meant something different. It was no longer a broken lock during a maneuver. It was the end of the challenge. The J-15 leveled, descended slightly, and turned back toward the carrier group. No flare, no afterburner burst, no final attempt to regain position, just a controlled withdrawal from an encounter it had entered on its own terms and was now leaving on someone else's. The Japanese Eagles maintained spacing. The lead F-15 stayed behind long enough to confirm separation. The two high aircraft held their brackets until the Chinese fighter was no longer a factor. Then, one by one, their radars returned to a lower posture. No one chased. No one celebrated. No one needed to. The data had already been collected. That was the part the J-15 pilot could not undo. For 31 minutes, he had transmitted under pressure. He had locked, lost, searched, reacquired, adjusted, closed, and transmitted again. Every cycle had been recorded. Every change in radar behavior had been captured by a fighter that was never simply trying to survive. The first mistake had been the initial targeting lock. The second mistake had been holding it too long. The third had been closing the distance. The fourth had been adapting in real time while Japanese systems listened. The final mistake had been believing the encounter was between one J-15 and one F-15. It was never one-on-one. It was one emitter against a formation, one radar against a network, one aggressive pilot against a plan built on patience, silence, and geometry. The Chinese fighter had shown how long it took to reacquire after a beam. It had shown how its radar behaved after a vertical break. It had shown how its antenna struggled when the target moved faster than the mechanical scan could follow. It had shown close-range tracking habits, search patterns, pulse behavior, and correction timing under pressure. None of that disappeared when the aircraft turned away. It remained in the files. It would be studied later in quiet rooms far from engine noise and cockpit tones. Analysts would replay the encounter frame by frame, signal by signal, second by second. They would mark the points where the radar hesitated. They would map the reacquisition windows. They would identify the angles where the system became weak. Future pilots would learn from it. Future electronic systems could be tuned against it. Future mission planners would know how to move around it. The J-15 had come in to prove it could hold a Japanese fighter in its radar picture. It left after proving exactly how that picture could be broken. Back near the Chinese carrier group, the aircraft lowered toward its recovery pattern. From the outside, it could still be described as a routine intercept, a defensive action, a demonstration of presence, the kind of clean language used in official statements. But the sky had told a different story. The F-15 had not fled. It had shaped the encounter. The J-15 had not dominated. It had exposed itself. And the aircraft that began the engagement as the hunter finished it, boxed in, outpositioned, and forced to disengage without a single shot being exchanged. That was the lesson. Modern air power is not always decided by the first aircraft to gain radar lock. Sometimes the first lock is the first mistake. Sometimes the pilot who looks passive is building the trap. Sometimes restraint is not weakness. It is control. The Japanese lead pilot checked fuel, altitude, and separation. All stable. He made one short transmission. Contact disengaging. Formation secure. Data collected. Then the three Eagles turned back toward home, their silhouettes fading into the evening sky southeast of Okinawa. Behind them, the Chinese carrier group continued on course. No explosion, no dramatic cockpit headline, no final spectacle, just one carrier fighter returning with empty hands and a radar that had spoken too much. The challenge ended exactly where it began, in silence. But this time, the silence belonged to Japan.